So round one here. First question of the day. So getting to writing rules here, right? So, or technique, but there's the old saying, kill your darlings. And I think the basic premise is, right, you have that beautiful piece, of prose, probably more prose than poetry. I think that statement goes by, but you have this beautiful little poetic line, but maybe it's impacting flow or something. So I guess the first part would be, do you agree with the axiom of killing your darlings, as like painful as it sounds? And if not, how do you deal with it? Like, how do you actually include them in a way that doesn't kind of overwhelm the story or maybe hinder the story you're trying to tell? So maybe then we'll just start again. Let me switch orders here for my screen. Okay, Dario, let's tag you in. You want to start us?
Sure. Writing rules are so hard and obnoxious. I mean, my reflexive answer to any question about writing rules is it depends. That applies to everything. I should wear it on a sign around my neck. And I think the problem is that, the experienced writer doesn't need the rule or the advice, and the neophyte writer is going to misunderstand it 90% of the time and follow it blindly or wrongly. I can't remember who it was. Was it, his name will come to me, who said, if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. Well, that's all well and fine, but sometimes you turn out a piece of good prose, and in the right place, it can shine. I think it's a matter of placement more than anything, even if it's a slight digression or not directly relevant. And if you're writing a novel, you've got room to digress. I'm a stylist. I like well-turned language, and I see no reason to excise it unless it's really doing harm. So I think there's a lot of things to look at before you look at a piece of well-turned prose if you're looking for cuts. Sometimes it's just a nice little gift to the reader.
Sure. Well, and I've always thought it was a little bit of a strange rule, being that it's a language medium, right? So the idea I almost think it's a reflection on movies, like cinema getting so big of the day. It's like, no, just be the camera that observes everything, right? Yeah, and don't get into it. And so I've always thought it was a bit strange from just that perspective. So why would you? The flip side, though, I do get, because especially like I write literary fiction, at times and things anyways. And a lot of my work is, classified as literary, and literary writers can go very much like on a high horse and they're just blathering drunkenly off. And sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you're just like, where in the world are we? What is happening now? Like, and I forget who's talking, what story this is, like where we are. So I think your point about placement is a good one. Is I think the discretion on when to do it too is you don't have to, every time someone goes to get a sip of water, you don't have to, his parched mouth was, what I mean? Like, doesn't need 97 adjectives and a beautiful turn of phrase for every little thing that happens in the story. So it is interesting from there. So Jesse, you want to maybe take us from there?
Yeah, I'm glad you came to me, because I think that's great, right? It can fit somewhere. Maybe if it doesn't fit in this particular scene or moment, it can fit somewhere else. And also I feel like it can fit in other spaces, right? Like I tweet, I post different things in different places. Like, so what I try to do is, like, if I take something out, I keep it somewhere, because I know I'll use it somewhere, either in, later on in this work or some other space. But I think what changed for me is that when I, was a younger writer, I just couldn't let anything go. I thought that, every single sentence, I was like, I know what this means. This is so beautiful. Like, you have to love this. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you, Right. So I think I've definitely seen myself change over time. Now I'm just very quick to, like, no, that doesn't work. Yep. You've written something like that before. Okay, it's great. We'll just put it over here. So I've become a lot more I don't know what the word is. Like, I want to say distant, but that implies like, I don't care. More, less attached, I guess. I don't know. I'm not,
Well, I think
yeah.
there's the discernment, right? You're just more discerning, I think. Like, it's like you can understand,
Yeah,
like,
maybe
you know what I
that's
mean?
it.
Like, they're not, the whole thing is your darling, not the individual sentences.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah,
It's all in
yeah,
service
I
of
get
this
you.
greater project. So I really like what Dario had to say about taking it out, and it can fit in different places. It's not like a hard and fast thing. Like, oh no, this doesn't work. It has to go. Like
Right.
you're also like, as you're writing, you're kind of getting into a style and getting into a voice. And I feel like things like that come
Mm.
up for a reason as part of the project.
Right.
So most likely could be a place for it. Right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I love what you said there too, because that's one thing I started doing. I don't know when, but I have a file. Every time I'm writing something, I have the file I'm working on, and then I have a cuts file.
The
Yeah,
out,
And
exactly.
it's
me too.
yeah, so it's just like,
Exactly.
it's never really abandoned. It's just like it's at a foster home, you know, and like, and the ones that I think are really good, like kind of put in a certain thing, and yeah, you can find a place later, or maybe it is just a tweet, maybe it's, you know, maybe it goes nowhere, maybe it inspires another story at some point, right? It might be that little thing, and you might look at it later and go, oh, you know, I have this, you know, this poem, this short story I want to write based on that. So I think that's a brilliant idea.
But kill your darlings, I guess, is like a hard. I mean, I guess it's like a good guide point, right? Like, don't become so attached to everything if it doesn't work. You know, you take. But I agree also with Dario that, you know, rules are tricky. You know, maybe in the beginning it's good to have some guideposts as you're learning. Actually, you really, you know, I feel like when I read things, I can tell very quickly if what I'm reading, you know, is trying to adhere to all these specific rules, or if it's kind of someone's free voice. And
Sure.
obviously there's someone's free voice. And so I think rules are, you know, maybe keep them in the back of your mind, but also like experiment and try to be yourself. And, you know, we're all different, we're all weird, right? And I want to know
Right.
the weird you. I don't want to know, I don't want to know that, you know, the you who's like putting on a suit and tie and presenting yourself to me. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and that's perfect. Because and the reason I put these together is the next question is going to be about voice and things, and I think they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. So that's great. You already kind of led us there. Gaby, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I very much ascribe to either taking it to the end of the work or end of the chapter. If it doesn't belong where you have it, maybe it can come somewhere else, and then you can always offload it onto a reference page. I do journalism work, so I'm going to have like a whole transcript of conversations with people. I'm not going to use everything that they say, but I find that it's very helpful, especially if I ever have to go back and look at something again, to just have all that information. And then I can refer to it, and then I can use it for whatever I need. So, I mean, it's not really killing them. It's really just coming up with a priority of what's the best way to say this right now in this particular passage. And then what did I write that I really love so much that doesn't exactly belong here? Put it on the reference sheet. This might come up again. You know, I do. I dig through stuff that's a couple years old. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember talking to that guy. Oh, I wonder if he could say anything in this article. You know, never know.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it's,
absolutely.
you know, allow your darlings to move around, not kill your darlings.
Freedom.
Right. Yeah.
Free your
Sometimes you let
darlings.
your darlings be free, right?
Yeah.
Don't put them away. I think there's a couple things I think about, you know, with it. Because the top three things I think with it is, one is try to make them critical to the text, right? So there's it's just a flowery piece of prose that maybe is not benefiting something, but if you can make that flowery piece of prose mean something to the character, the greater story, add some nuance, you know, to the setting, whatever it might be. So like there's someone had mentioned it to me the other day. There was a short story. I know Jesse and Dario, of course, you guys have read the collection Without Expiration, but there's
So good.
Left Us. Thank you so much. But there's a story Left to Soak. and the old lady, she's in the hospital and she's on her way home, and she's really just pissed because she knows like her husband hasn't done the dishes, right? And so she looks at the swaying grasses, and lots of times the swaying grasses, that's a sign of freedom, right? You think, oh, the horse is going to things. And all she thinks about is how rooted they are. And then I'm going to paraphrase myself badly, but it's, and I think, did I note it down here? Yeah, so like it's basically like they're rooted in place. They can't move. They're not free, and they're swaying. They're stretching just for that moment, that feeling of freedom. Because she feels like she's lost that too. Like she's rooted and she's just desperate for it, right? So it's a beautiful little line, if I say so myself, but the person had said so, like little review or whatever they wrote for it. They pointed that one out, specifically. And it's just one line on her way home. It's a sentence, it's a little paragraph, 2 sentences, one just kind of putting her in the car, traveling. And it gets down deeper into what her character is. And enlivens it, for the reader. So I think like if you can wiggle it in to where it's critical to the story, because it's almost like when you do that, you're shining a spotlight, on something. So what are you spotlighting? And you can do that with language, in kind of beautiful ways. And I think that's the other point is really think about pacing, especially literary writers. I think it's you can do that. You can have these really great little, diatribes kind of going on, and I love them. I've certainly written them and had to cut back on them, but kind of consider the pacing of what you're writing and how it fits in. And the other one, it was funny, there was a gentleman show, when are we airing this one? May, probably won't show by the time this one releases, but I'll try to put it up here in the little YouTube box when it goes. Keir Graff was on the show, and a brilliant writer. And he was like, a teacher had told him, he really, really very funny guy, because he went over his whole history of failure. And anyone like knows me, I love talking about failures, like my own like personal failures all the time.
Life.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, one of the lessons he got like way back when, it was like a mimetic fallacy. And the teacher was like, what? A mimetic fallacy is when something dull happens and you describe it dully. Right. So I was like, if it's something like maybe you can spruce those up. And so it's really funny. I think I titled his episode that, like, not a mimetic fallacy or something. But it's sometimes if you have some vital information you need to get across, if you make it a little more interesting, then you're not kind of lulling the reader to sleep with it. So those are kind of things that
really good metaphor, shining a spotlight on it. I like that.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is there anything you would, with someone that wants to, because a lot of people don't want to kill their darlings just in general, right? Anyone have ideas about how, so maybe things to be aware of, if you want to try to keep those things in, I try to go over like 3 little kind of hows to do it, but anything to kind of think about, be aware of, any tricks, anything you guys do in your own work?
Well, I would say, like, for a newer writer, right? Because I was definitely like that in the beginning. Just go ahead and write it all out, get it all out, and then go back, read it again, read it again. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you will see, as a reader of your own work, that some of those things it's okay to not kill, but move, or allowed to be free to go somewhere else. Right. Migrate your darlings.
Migrate your darlings are birds now.
That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get, like, because that's too, like, if someone had told me, when I was, when did I really start writing seriously? Like late 20s, like, said like, no, this doesn't work. I would have gotten really defensive. Yeah, right. Sure. So I feel like you also have to let a writer go through their process. We're at different phases, different points in time. And so I think that would be a beginning writer, just write it all out, get it all out, let it out.
Right. No, I think that's, yeah, no, I think that's good for almost any writer, right? I mean, you can be doing it a long time, and sometimes you get precious with your words, right? Or like, write it all out. It's you got to start somewhere. So write it all out, right? However it feels in that time, and then rewrite and kind of figure it out, analyze it as you go. So I think that's great advice.
I tend to underwrite. you know, on a revision or rewrite, I'm typically adding stuff to the early drafts. But I think one of the things, you know, I work as an editor for a living. And one of the things I see with a lot of newer writers is a tendency to over-describe sometimes. That there's also the opposite tendency, but I think you need to watch it in description. This isn't the 19th century. Most readers don't want a shit ton of description. Place, you know, usually a couple of general broad brush strokes and a, you know, little highlighted detail are all you need. You don't need a page to describe a location or a person.
Right.
Especially people. I tend not to describe my characters most of the time, or to do so very lightly. I'd rather the reader imagine them. But I think that some authors get carried away with that. So that, you know, those could be darlings. To me, I think of darlings as just a well-turned piece of prose.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
it can be anything. You can get attached to anything. And I think Jessica's advice is really good. You know, I'd add "let it cool."
Mm-hmm. Amen. Yeah.
You ever write that in response to people's work? This isn't the 19th century.
No, I'm most of the time I'm more tactful if I want to be paid.
Right. You add like a RR in their name. Like next time I give you a thing and I've blathered on too long, you'd be like, yeah, William R.R. Hincy. You know, this isn't Lord of the Rings, bud.
I just wanted to add that when you're figuring out, you're like your free range darlings. It's really, it sounds obvious, but it's a process that every writer goes through. You have to stop telling the story that you see with your own imagination, and you have to start telling the story that people can envision for themselves. Yeah. So sometimes we really hold certain things very close, and we're like, oh, this totally makes sense. Well, it makes sense to me. You know, is this really, you know, and I have one story in particular. I keep getting the same feedback. I don't really like this ending. I don't really like I thought the ending was hilarious. And, you know, and so I had to just really be like, all right, Gabe, this isn't working. We're reading this story. What are we going to do about it? You know? And so you have to change things sometimes, because what is in your imagination doesn't necessarily end up on the page. And that's the challenge.
Sure.
Sorry, can you elaborate on that a little, maybe with an example or two? I that's really interesting. I'd like to hear more.
Well, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that your life experience is something that a lot of people understand, and you can't be a writer and connect to lots of people and do that. If you're writing as a woman about a woman character and you refer to things that a guy's not going to know about, then, you know, half your readership possibly could get lost in it. So you have to set things up, and you have to tell people, well, show them really what is going into the story and how it's however it fits in your head as the person creating it. You have to translate that with words to. And I think some people that are beginning get very hung up, and I encounter this as an editor too. They get very hung up on their life experience, and they're writing about something else, somebody else. One time I edited a story about a druggie, had this terrible problem, and he was hooked, and he tried to get clean and he couldn't. And the author said something about how he left his last foster home when he was graduating high school, and he was out on his own, and then he went to college. And I'm like, did this guy really go to college? You know what I mean? Like, I could see college age. I can't see college for this guy. I mean, the writer went to college, but this character would not. So details like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is interesting. And I think I've noticed, well, it's hard to speak generally, but I've noticed that from my experience, it seems like how do I put this? Older writing, it seems like readers were invited to do a lot more digging maybe, or like they would, you'd have this piece that would be kind of bizarre and not easily explained, but it seemed like there was this hunger to try and like really figure it out. Like, what does this person say? Like, who is this person? And it seems like that isn't as prevalent anymore. And I wonder if some of that has to do with like communication becoming very standardized. Everything is, everybody writes everything all the time now. We're always seeing words. And so that sort of, I'm trying to think of, some of the modernists, right? When I read their stuff, it's like, they didn't care. Like if, I got it or
sure.
Like, here it is, this is interesting. Right. And so you can try and figure it out. And I do. But yeah, I don't think it's good or bad. I just think it's kind of changed maybe.
Right.
So
right.
maybe
Well, it's a good point in the I was just thinking when you're saying that conversation, it reminded me of there's the Hemingway quote about the iceberg, right? It's like you write what's sticking out of the iceberg, but there's so much more beneath it. And I think that can be the trick sometimes, is you still have to describe an iceberg. Like you still have to get the point out that that's an iceberg and not another ship or something. Right? Like you need some form to it. That's why like I tease Joyce because I really don't like him. But it's because I think I don't know I don't even know that it's an iceberg. I don't even know that I'm on the ocean. I feel like I'm so unbuoyed with it versus Hemingway, which I do really like, who I feel like I know kind of what's happening, that it's, as you see someone that was in the war that's very sad, but I know, I know what's happening. So I like one and don't like the other. And they're kind of doing the same thing, just in wildly different ways. Although Joyce writes some short stories and things that I think are very good. But
this was interesting. His early career, he was really like accessible. Well, not really, but much more accessible. And then he just progressively became, by the end with Finnegan's Wake, he was just like, I don't care, whatever. You can do whatever you want. This is what I'm writing. Like,
I feel like he was trolling. Finnegan's Wake is the biggest troll job in like writing history. I read an article, not to digress too wildly, but I read an article out here. There was a group that every week was reading, was it one chapter of Finnegan's Wake?
Oh yeah,
I think it was
years, right?
Yeah, it was like 26 years. They were just finishing. And they're like, do you guys feel accomplished? And they're just like, not really.
Yeah, maybe
I had a friend who did his thesis on Finnegan's Wake, and I can't imagine it.
Wow,
what a mind! But I guess what we've come around to is a broad definition of darlings, and tapping into Gaby's example there. It's basically anything we're attached to which might not work for others. Maybe that's a really good working definition of our darlings.
Sure. I agree. Well, and I like too, going back to what Gaby was saying too, is there's the ego, right? Like that she was putting aside her ego, was, oh, this isn't working. How do I make this work? And I think that helps you get past the darlings, is you got to get past this is, Jesse alluded to it earlier too. Is like, when I was younger, I'd been like, no. And I would have definitely done that when I was younger too. Hell, I might do that now. Like, what are you talking about?
Everyone else
Darlings. Crazy. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think the getting past the ego and getting to what the story is and realizing there's a reader out there, and that may be a darling to you, it may make no sense to anyone else. So awesome. So any final thoughts before we move to the next question?
Oh, just to let you know, speaking of Finnegan's Wake and how that was a big FU to the publisher, apparently the Sex Pistols did this with The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. They made an album that is absolutely horrific. And it was basically because they had a contract and they had to do something. And once in a while I'll be riding around with my husband and I'll be like, what is this horror? But they put it in the title. So I feel like everybody was properly warned.
Very good. Very good. See, it happens. It happens. At that point, like Joyce had gotten, drunk with Hemingway so much at the bar, he was just like, "I fuck all this. I, just whatever." My horrible accent, my Irish accent here. Awesome. So moving on then,